Great, so very good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to this final series of the Strategic Tools and Strategic Management lecture. If you recall, we started by looking at the three horizons, Horizon 1, 2, and 3. Horizon 1 being the short-term future, Horizon 2 being medium-term, and Horizon 3 being the long-term. We looked at a number of different models, a number of different tools and frameworks that can help you understand the strategic standing or the strategic decision-making tools that an organization adopts as part of their growth. Now, we looked at frameworks such as SWOT, PESTEL, we looked at Porter's 5 forces, we've looked at competitive profile matrix, we have looked ANSOF, we've looked at Porter, and we have also looked very, very briefly at scenario planning as a mechanism for facilitating strategic decisions. So these are all tools and frameworks that are used by organizations today as they try to facilitate their future thinking, try to facilitate discussions among senior leaders around where their business is going. So today we are going to start by looking at Horizon 3. So in this final lecture, we'll look at those tools which can be used to consolidate a market position, okay? So the business has already thought about what it's doing in the immediate term. It's got a plan for what's to come, but now it's all about looking at how do you create a new enterprise? How do you consolidate your business for the future so that it can continue to thrive? Now, medium-term future was anything up to 5 years. That's what we looked at last time. Today, we're going to be looking at longer terms. This can be anything beyond 5 years. So some companies have a 10-year vision, others even have a 20-year vision. So there's no prescribed time limit. However, 10 years is usually the normal. And trying to predict the future in 20 years' time is a lot more difficult and a lot more error-strewn than 10 years. One thing I want you to remember is with any strategy making, perhaps not Horizon 1, because Horizon 1 is short-term and can be reactive, but for medium-term or long-term Horizons 2 and 3, there are a number of assumptions that we have to make as strategy practitioners. We can't just know everything. We need to build in the element of unpredictability. We need to build an element of risk in the approach that we take, okay? So a number of assumptions that go into these models, a number of predictions almost about what the future might look like. So in order for us to really try to understand how Horizon 3 strategy is formed, there's a couple of different things that we need to be able to do. Number one is to have access to robust data. So what is robust data? Well, usually it'll be past performances or it will be performance-based metrics, performance-based KPIs that show how the business has performed. Why are those important, you might think? Because they're based in the past. I mean, how can the past inform the future? Well, that's the thing. It might not be able to inform the future, but it can certainly give you a good indication as to how your business may perform over the coming years. So past performances are a big way that organizations use to model, to predict what the future might look like. It gives you an indication of what sales level you've achieved, what growth you've had in your sales, what growth you've had in revenue and profit. It also allows you to map behavior of your customers. All of these things are all data points, all interesting statistics, figures that can be used for the business to model what the future may look like. It's about learned experiences. So what do I mean by that? It's about people in senior positions acknowledging perhaps how things have gone in the past, maybe understanding what mistakes they made, understanding what things they did wrong or things they did incorrectly that caused problems, and learning from them, okay? So don't ever underestimate the importance of learned experiences. Even big senior consultants will tell you that they don't always get it right. They'll have experiences, they'll have worked with companies where perhaps the strategic implementation, the strategic planning has failed or didn't achieve the result they wanted. That's not necessarily the fault of the consultant. That doesn't necessarily mean the consultant did a bad job, but it's about the consultant learning from that. What happened in that project? Why did perhaps the results not be similar to what was expected? Why did certain projects fail? It's all about learning from that experience, okay? So that's important in Horizon 3. And finally, we need to use that information to inform which tools we use in Horizon 3. And that's very, very fundamental, because without that information, we can't really look at Horizon 3. We can't really look at what the future might hold for our organization. So that's going to be the structure of today's lesson. Let's jump straight into some of the tools then. So the first one I want you to consider is benchmarking. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of benchmarking. It's basically an exercise where you use performance data from previous years or from other businesses and compare that with those of other organizations. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically, you're looking at how your business performs and you're mapping it across to your competitors. You're mapping it across to other organizations that operate in the same industry sphere. So you might be thinking, well, what's the purpose? It's similar to competitive profile matrix that we did in Horizon 2, but it's different because you're looking specifically at key performance indicators. You're looking at stuff around profit, you're looking at stuff around number of customers, perhaps looking at stuff around growth of the organization. So these are all the elements that are important here, okay? That's what you want to focus on. Now, what does benchmarking really mean? Well, basically, sorry, someone's talking. Can I just ask everyone to make sure they're in mute, please? Okay, that should be everyone muted now. So yes, benchmarking is essentially an exercise whereby we search for the best practices in the industry. We search to see what are other organizations doing that is working for them, that is resulting in a successful outcome for them. And that's what we want to be able to adopt. It also allows us to experience superior performance within our own business, because by benchmarking and by pitting ourselves against competitors, against other organizations with good practices, we're able to start understanding what we are doing, setting targets, setting goals for what we want our organization to achieve. So in the long run, we may want to hit, I don't know, for example, a 200% rise in revenue over 10 years. That might be the target, but it's incremental. You can't hit 200% in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's all about smaller targets. And benchmarking is a good exercise because it allows you to see how your growth compares to that of perhaps, as I said, your competition. So what and how can we use the benchmarking tool? Well, basically it allows us to uncover successful business processes. So these are things that work well for an organizations. These are things that go really well for what the business is looking to achieve, okay? So what I mean by that is by observing other businesses, what an organization can do is it can identify the processes, it can identify the skills, the competencies, and how they contribute to the organization's success. Now, what that means for our understanding of strategy is it's a way in which we can facilitate knowledge sharing. So the knowledge that's acquired by other businesses can be transferred to your own. Now, obviously, no organization is going to share with you their internal strategy. They're not going to really share with you information about how they're performing. That's not really their intention, okay? But by the same token, they will be interested in understanding how your organization performs. They want to know what you're doing that they can learn from. So sometimes it can be a mutual exchange. It can be about understanding what you can harness from that business, and they'll be looking to see what they can get from you. Associatedly, we also have competitive advantage. Now, we talked about Michael Porter in lecture number 1. Well, Michael Porter is basically the forefather of the literature on competitive advantage. He essentially discusses how competitive advantage is the purpose of strategy. So what that means for us in particular is how can our business gain competitive advantage by applying best practices from other businesses? So again, if someone else is already doing it, why does that mean you'll be able to get competitive advantage? Well, what you're doing essentially is you're learning what they're good at, and then you're combining that with what you already know so that you can make it even better, okay? So with benchmarking, it's not about copying other people, it's about learning from them but then adapting it or changing it or making it better so that you can achieve competitive advantage. Okay, and that's the purpose of benchmarking. We don't do benchmarking just to copy them, because if you're copying them, you're only ever going to be as good as them. You know, by copying someone, you can't be better than them. You can only be the same as them. But by understanding what they do, learning from what they do, and then using that to inform how you work and using that to boost your own performance, you can then achieve competitive advantage. Okay. So an example I've given you here is small family businesses that are selling online can apply the social media strategies used by companies that have internet blogs, etc., to attract new customers. Okay, so it's a way for them to learn from some of the big companies and see how they operate and see what they can learn from that too. Okay. So how is benchmarking used and what's the fundamental purpose of it? Well, it's a widely used tool and it's very well recognized. I don't think there's very many strategy practitioners or even organizations that wouldn't have touched benchmarking at some point in their decision-making conversation. There's an actual network called the Global Benchmarking Network who conducted a survey in 2018 or 17, and that demonstrated that 68% of all businesses worldwide use some form of informal benchmarking. So it's quite a well adopted practice. Almost 7/10 of the global business population are making use of the technology. 49%, or almost one half of all businesses, use what's called performance benchmarking. Now that's when you're looking at KPIs, that's when you're looking at performativity, you're looking at profits, you're looking at revenues, you're looking at sales, etc., etc. Those are key performance indicators. Or finally, 40% almost of businesses use what's called best practice benchmarking. And that's looking at, well, how does a business do what it does? What are its logistics? What are its supply chain? What's its operations like? That's when you're doing best practice. Okay, what do they do that I can adopt or I can adapt so that I can achieve success for my business? Sticking with benchmarking, then there are different benchmarking tools and different benchmarking practices I want you to be aware of. Number one, there's such a thing as what's called strategic benchmarking. What that does is it's usually a way to identify the best way to compete in a market. What do I mean by that? Well, it's all about thinking what is the strategic perspective of that organization? What is that organization looking to achieve? What's its mission? What's its ambition? What's it trying to do? How is it competing in this market? During this process, you identify what's called winning strategies that are used by your competition. Now, again, these will tend to be organizations outside your own industry. Why? Because your close competition don't want you finding out. They don't really want to share that information with you. But an organization outside of your industry sector might be more willing to share because they know they might get something in return. They might be able to learn something from you that they can apply in their organization. So, for example, Toyota, I'm sure you've all heard of Toyota, the car manufacturer. They came up with a just-in-time practice, which has been adopted by most industries and most car manufacturers across the world. But Toyota were more willing to share with other industries. They weren't willing to share with car manufacturers. They didn't really want to share with BMW or Mercedes or Ford or Citroen. They preferred to keep it in-house. They preferred to keep that to themselves. But they were willing to share with, for example, manufacturing organizations. They were willing to share with retail organizations. They were willing to share with other organizations where they could perhaps learn something from them in return. Okay. You can also use it to look at competitive strategic goals. So again, it's also about thinking, what are the strategic goals of that organization? What does the perspective of that organization look like? What they're looking to achieve? And that's important too, because it's not just about copying their strategic goals. It's about understanding the process that they're taking to get there. What are they doing in trying to achieve that goal? So you've got to also look at their strategic goals. And finally, how can you apply some of these winning strategies or goals to your own business? Again, you don't want to copy because their goals, the strategies will be very specific to their company. You want to understand, okay, if that's been successful for them based on their industry sector, what do we need to do to tweak this, to change this, to make it work for us? So that's all about strategic benchmarking. What about performance benchmarking? Well, that's all about comparing your business's services to others, okay? So it's about thinking stuff like service quality, the features of your product, the price, the speed or the lead time, reliability of the product, the quality of your product, and how satisfied your clients are with the product or service they receive. However, you can actually use it for pretty much anything that has measurable metrics. So, you could look at stuff like how long have they kept customers waiting on the phone. You could look at, how long does it take for them to solve a complaint customer issue. So anything that can be measured in days and time and monetary terms, anything that can be measured through that performance metric, you can use for a form of performance benchmarking. Overall, it determines how strong your services are compared to your competition. Okay. Finally, we have something which is called process benchmarking. Now, process benchmarking is slightly different. Now, what that means is you're looking to examine other businesses that engage in similar activities, okay, to identify what's called best practice. Usually it comes from a form of performance benchmarking. You would use performance to understand which companies are doing it best, who's making the most profit, who's making the most sales, then say, okay, what are they doing? What's their processes? What are their ways of working that we can adopt? Firstly, you identify the weak points of your own service. You start by looking in-house. You look at your performance in your company and you say, where are we weak? Where are we not performing as strong as we should? Then you focus on those key processes that you can adopt from somewhere else to try and eliminate your weaknesses. So again, it's not just about copying what someone else is doing and forcing it into your organization. It's about looking at your weaknesses and then saying, in order to combat my weakness, what can I learn from others? For example, using performance comparison may identify that a service X is more superior but pricier than competition service Y. So again, if you look at your service and you look at someone else's service, you might think, okay, mine's is better, theirs is better, mine's is more pricier, theirs is more pricier. It's all about understanding where is it that you're making a gain, where is it that you're actually losing, okay? And where you're losing or where you have a weakness is what you want to address through benchmarking. And how do you do that? Well, you improve it with similar or less cost-heavy processes. Again, you might think, well, that was simple, but it's not always simple until you understand how you're going to replace it. What are you going to do? What's the new best practice? And usually you can learn that by doing benchmarking, by looking at other organizations that have achieved success. Okay, so that's the purpose of benchmarking. Secondly, we have 4 different approaches within that, looking at benchmarking, okay? Firstly, we have what's called internal benchmarking. Now, that's all about how a large corporation usually, so you don't tend to see small businesses using internal benchmarking, mostly because internal benchmarking is all about looking at how you perform inside your business. If you're a small organization, i.e. you only have 5 or 6 staff, then you're not really going to be able to achieve success now, are you? Well, achieve success in the context of benchmarking because you don't have something to compare what your business does. So if you've got 3 or 4 people working for you, likelihood is they're all working in the same way and therefore achieving the same results. So you're not actually learning anything about what you could do to improve, change. Whereas if you're a large corporation, for example, Apple, for example, Samsung, Microsoft, some of the biggest companies in the world really, they can do what's called internal benchmarking. They could compare the performance of their business entity in the UK compared to the USA, compared to Singapore, compared to China, compared to Australia. You compare how your geographical entities your geographical subsidiaries are performing across the globe. It also allows you to do internal benchmarking. We have a lot of different services. For example, Uber have got Uber Eats, they've got Uber the taxi service, they've started moving into electric scooters. So what they could do is they could compare performance across their services. Why is it that Uber Eats is outperforming Uber Taxi, or why is it that the scooter business is not performing? You can do what's called internal benchmarking and see what can you learn from within your business. Within these businesses, what tends to happen is similar functions are usually performed by different teams. So for example, there'll be a marketing team for UK and Europe. There'll be a separate marketing team for China and maybe South Asia. There'll be a separate marketing team for North America, maybe even a separate marketing team in South America. So what you can tend to do is learn from those different areas. You can learn from those functions that are exact same. It's all marketing, okay? But different geographical entities, different areas, different people will have slightly different ways of working. It's down to you as a business to identify which one works best. Benchmarking can also be used to compare the work of your teams, to identify those that are working better, and to share knowledge of high achieving and high performers. This is a technique that's used very often in contact centres or customer service centres. You tend to be positioning teams. People that work in call centres or have experience of working in customer service, you'll tend to hear from them that they've been put in a team, a department, a particular number that identifies them and their colleagues from everyone else. Why businesses do that is it allows them to compare performance across the teams. It allows them to see which team's doing best, which team's not performing, and what can be learned from each of those teams. It also allows them to share knowledge and to achieve what's called higher performance. Now, that basically means a way for you to be able to disseminate what you have learned. It's about sharing your experiences. Sometimes you might have a team with more experienced people that have been with the business for 4, 5, 6 years. They know the processes, they know the shortcuts, they know how to work efficiently. It's about learning from them. It's about how can they disseminate their knowledge and their experience to train, to improve, to make the next generation of workers better. It can also be used by businesses that have expanded, but which lack the proper knowledge sharing systems. So again, if you're a new or a relatively new business that's looking to grow, benchmarking is a good exercise. You can look to see how are other businesses that are also growing, how are other businesses that are in the market you're looking to enter performing, what can you learn from them? Now that can also be done in-house. You can do that within your own business by looking at what other departments did. How did the sales team grow? How did the operations team grow? How did the marketing team grow? What can you learn from that? The second approach I want to cover with you is what's called external or competitive benchmarking. Now, competitive benchmarking is basically where a business compares itself with competitors inside the industry. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, if we were to look at the mobile phone market, it's if Apple was to compare itself to Samsung. It's if Huawei was to compare itself to HTC or Sony or all these other phone manufacturers. Okay, so it's about comparing yourself to your competition directly. It's used usually to compare products and services. Okay, why? Because you'll be lucky to find anyone that's willing to share sensitive strategy information within the same industry. Of course, if you're Apple, you don't want Samsung knowing what your strategy is. If you're Samsung, you don't want Apple knowing what your strategy is. So it's usually difficult to do competitive benchmarking with strategy or process. It tends to be usually based on products and services. So what does the latest iPhone have that the Samsung phone doesn't? What does Samsung have that iPhone doesn't? What can they learn from each other? Secondly, we have what's called external benchmarking. Now, this is where you examine an industry either inside or outside of your chosen market. Okay, so for example, Samsung might think, well, in order to beat Apple, why don't we look at another industry? Why don't we look at laptop manufacturers, or why don't we look at computer manufacturers, because they've got more processing power, their devices are perhaps faster or better in terms of quality. How can we adopt some of that technology in our mobile phones? So that's an example of what's called external benchmarking. Okay, they're not looking at the mobile phone industry, they're looking at a different industry to try and understand how they can adopt some of the best practices. This can be a more beneficial approach due to the higher possibility of finding best practice. So again, what you'll tend to find is organizations are more willing to share some of their more sensitive documents, some of their more sensitive information with people outside of their own industry. They don't want to share it with their competition, but they're happy to share it perhaps in return for either money or something else with competition from outside of their industry. Okay. Approach number 3 is all about what's called functional benchmarking. Now, basically, in this situation, managers of functional departments often find it useful to analyze how well the team is performing compared to other functional departments within the business. So we spoke about this already to a degree. It's all about looking at functions such as marketing, finance, HR, operations, supply chain, sales. These are all different functional areas of a business. And you might want to understand, well, why is it that marketing are able to only generate 10 leads, but sales are selling to over 100 leads? What's going on? Why are marketing not reaching the same number of clients? This is when you can compare your performance within your functions. You can then apply what is best practice in other functional areas. So perhaps sales have found a unique way to target new customers that marketing can learn from. Perhaps supply chain or logistics have found a new way of getting the product to the customer faster. That involves changing the packaging or changing the structure of the product. Again, if they shared that with operations, operations can then start packaging it the same way that logistics require it to be. So again, it's about sharing best practice so that the organization as a whole can succeed. You can also look at a wide range of organizations. It doesn't always have to be your own organization. You might be able to access what a sales department is doing in a completely different industry area because, again, as I said, they're willing to share with you in return for something else. So again, you can learn from other organizations about how their functional benchmarking works. Number 4, and the last approach I want to share with you today is what's called generic benchmarking. Now, this basically is an approach that refers to comparisons that focus on the work processes rather than the business practices. So what do I mean by that? So I'll give you an example. Basically, say your business tries to improve its marketing capabilities. Okay, that's your focus. Your organization wants to become better at marketing. And what you do is you benchmark itself against a business called Business A. Now, whilst you're observing Business A's marketing processes, you might also realize how well their human resources are managed. So what you can then do is you can implement your learning to improve both your own marketing and your HR policies. So again, it's not about saying I'm focusing on marketing, that's all I can improve. It's also about more general stuff. It's also about identifying where the organization might have advantage in different functional expertise, not just in one department. Perhaps whilst observing marketing, you saw a way to improve sales, you saw a way to improve operations, you saw a way to improve finance. These are all things that you can then change in your own organization. And that's what's called generic benchmarking. You learn something that might not be relevant in the context of that organization, but it is relevant in the context of what you do. Okay. So those are different types of benchmarking. So why would you do benchmarking? So hopefully I've been able to share some of these with you whilst we've been talking, but the biggest benefits of doing it are, well, number one, it's easy to understand and use. All you're doing really is comparing two organizations, two functions, two departments, two teams. It's not a difficult exercise. If anyone's looking to do this for their assignment, it's a fairly simple exercise, benchmarking, and you can use some of the criteria we've discussed, different forms, performance, competitive, strategic. You can look at functional, generic, you can look external, internal, so on and so forth. It's also fairly low cost. If you were to be working for an organization and you've been asked to take part in a benchmarking exercise, you'll tend to find that a lot of it's based on desk research, perhaps sending a few emails, contacting a few people, but really it's a very low cost exercise. It doesn't involve too much human capital or expenditure, and it can unlock, potentially, if done correctly, it can unlock a number of key gains for your organization. It also helps to bring innovation. into your enterprise, it helps your business to achieve more. It provides insights into how other businesses and business processes are working. It increases your level of performance, comparing it to your rivals. It can also facilitate your cooperation between teams and departments. Okay, so a few different things that you might wish to consider when thinking about why benchmarking, or if you're looking to discuss benchmarking in exercise, I need you to be able to identify some of the benefits and perhaps even weaknesses. So what about disadvantages? Now I've given you 6 advantages. What about the 6 disadvantages that are in the literature? Well, firstly, you need to be able to find a company that's willing to become your benchmark partner. In order for you to have access to the information, really you want to have someone inside that organization who's on your side or is willing to talk to you. If you don't have that, then you're probably going to struggle. It's also sometimes impossible to assign a metric that can measure a particular process. Again, what is the best way to measure a process? I mean, is it number of days? Is it the cost of doing something? Is it the number of labor hours involved? You know, how many people you have working on it? What do you really need to be able to measure that metric? Perhaps if your business is not experienced enough. Sorry, someone at the door, give me 2 seconds. I just need to use at the door. Hi everyone, really sorry, there was somebody at the door just with a parcel. So yeah, we're looking at disadvantages of benchmarking. So again, sometimes you can't find an organization willing to partner with you. Sometimes it's difficult to measure performance. You know, how do you choose which is the correct measure? Is it finance in terms of cost? Is it number of days? Is it number of hours? You know, it's difficult to identify what is the best metric. You might also see that your business is not experienced at benchmarking. So again, what do? Do you need to hire someone, which can come at a cost? If you're looking to bring in a consultant or bring a number of consultants, that will come at a cost to your business. Managers in your organization might resist the changes you need in order to improve performance. So again, sometimes managers or people, employees, they're reluctant to change. They don't really want to change. They don't really want to keep adopting new processes. So again, that's something you have to manage internally. And finally, you might identify a few best practices, but will they work in your organization? Maybe it is because of, you know, the culture of your company. Maybe it's because you don't have the skill of employees. It might not be possible for your business to benefit from that best practice in the way you would like. So what about guidelines? When you're benchmarking, these are the things I want you to keep in mind, okay? So if you're looking to understand how an organization performs, if you're looking to understand how your organization can become better, and you're looking to use the benchmarking tool as part of your exercise, you might want to consider some of these guidelines. Guideline number 1 is all about only choosing services or processes which perform poorly, okay? If you're already good at operations or you're already good at marketing, then why do you want to benchmark yourself in another company? You could risk losing some information or sharing information that you don't want to share. You could also be just wasting your time because you might not get anything that improves what you're doing. Okay, so only choose services and processes that are performing poorly and then do benchmarking, because then you know at least that all the time you're investing, the time and money that you've invested are actually generating some return for your business. You also have to define specific metrics that you want to measure. Now, these can be stuff that is specific to your organization, specific to industries, specific to your market, or it can be more generic. But the one thing you have to make sure is you don't choose services or processes that cannot be measured. Okay, so if you cannot measure, for example, the cost of transferring something from one warehouse to another, then there's no point in comparing that statistic, because if it can't be measured, it's not worth your time. Okay, so it's about making sure that you're only comparing things that can be measured. You've got to be able to prepare your business for change. You must understand that there will be what's called internal resistance. There will be people not willing, perhaps, to change, people not willing to do what's always required. And finally, you've got to be able to choose a team that is qualified. You've got to be able to choose a team that is going to deliver the change that's required, going to deliver what people are looking for. And the benchmarking is easy to use, but choosing people that are skilled enough to undertake it. If you're choosing people that don't have the skills or capabilities, then the quality of your benchmarking exercise is going to be poor. You've also got to include the managers who are responsible for implementing that change. So again, if you're going to be doing process, for example, benchmarking, then you need to involve the managers who will be responsible for adopting the new processes, will be responsible for making sure that the organization achieves what's required using those new processes. So some guidelines further that I want you to consider. Well, number 5, it's all about participating in benchmarking networks. So I shared one with you earlier on, which was all about the global benchmarking network, but there's others as well, but not the only one. There's others that you might want to consider. There's also participation. Can you find benchmarking partners that can help you, providing the metrics that are needed? That can also help you reduce cost. If a business is already presenting information or doing information or sharing information in the things that that you're aware of or things that you know, then why would you not want to partner with them? Because they already have information in the structure that you want them to be in. Finally, best standards and ideas in unrelated areas. It's about significance of insights that can be gained by observing businesses in unrelated industry sectors. So again, what can you learn by observing other businesses? How is that relevant to what your business is doing? These are all things that you might want to consider. Finally, benchmarking can be understood as a 5-stage process. So how do you undertake benchmarking? I've been talking a little bit about what benchmarking is, why it's important, how you can benefit from it, but more specifically, what can you gain from it? Well, it's about planning. It's about finding the right partner organizations. It's about collecting the information that's required. It's then about analysis skills. How do you break the analysis down? How do you understand what's going on? And then finally, how do you then improve? Okay, how do you become better? How do you understand what your organization can do? And I hope that gives some idea of what the purpose of benchmarking is. And again, just breaking it down to more detail, what's involved in planning? It's about assembling your team, defining what metrics you want to identify. It's about finding a benchmarking partner, someone willing to share information with you. It's about collecting information, analyzing it, identifying any gaps, cascading those results, and providing recommendations on how to improve. And then finally, implementing those recommendations so that you can experience the improvement that you're looking for. Okay. We'll then move on to a new model, but before we do that, let's take a quick break. I've been talking for a long time about benchmarking, and I appreciate it's a lot to get your head around as well. So let's take a quick 5-minute break, and we will resume with gap analysis when we come back. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Hello, Dr. Akwa.
Hello there, yes.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, I'm just going to pop into a meeting, so I'm going to leave. Thank you.
Okay, no problem at all. Make sure
I'm at work, yes. Thank you, yes. Really enjoying it, but thank you.
Thank you now. Cheers.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Hopefully you all had a chance to stretch your legs, grab a tea or a coffee. Right, so where did we stop? Well, gap analysis is the next step we want to look at, and this is all part of our Horizon 3 strategy. So what do I mean by gap analysis? Well, basically it's about identifying what the differences are between where the business is at today. So what have you achieved so far? What have you done? And where you would like to be. Okay, so it's about comparing today and the the desired future state. Okay, so where would you like your business to be in 10 or 20 years time? Identifying the gap. How do you fill that gap? Okay, so how can you break that down further? Well, there's three questions you should be asking yourself. Number one, where are you now? Okay, so what's the current stage of your business? Where do you wish to be? So where do you want to take this business? The number three, how are you then going to close that gap? Okay, so where you are today, where you want to be, and what do you need to do to get there? What's the gap between today and that identified future state? So by identifying the gaps, you can do what's called improve your business efficiency. You can become better at what you're doing. You can improve the services that you offer, the products that you offer. So it's about making sure that the products or services you provide are the best they can be. And finally, it's a way for you to increase your profitability. It's a way for you to make more money, revenue, sales, etc. You can then spend your energy and resources on addressing those gaps. How do you then improve your business to achieve success? So what do you do with gap analysis, or how do you achieve successful results? Well, it's all about identifying the current state of your business. Do you firstly have a strategic plan? What is the main priority, or what are the main priorities in your plan? For example, you might want to increase your business growth by 10% for a year for the next 10 years. You might want to grow at 5% per year. Maybe your business current state is 5% growth. So currently you're growing at 5% every year, but you want to achieve 10% every year. How are you going to do it? What's the gap? How do you get from 5% growth to 10% growth? Something to consider here is that your current state does not always have to be financial. You might not be looking at finances. You might be looking at customers retention. You might be looking at your reputation or your position in the industry. Maybe you're currently fifth or sixth and you want to be first. How do you get from where you are today to first position in the industry? So again, it can be a lot of different measures. Don't always have to be financial or profit based. You may also have a lot of current state. So what do you mean by that? Well, for example, you might have the best customer service, i.e., people like dealing with your staff. People feel as if your staff are good at resolving the problem, so they might rank you number one for customer service. However, the quality of your products might not be very good. I mean, you might be getting a lot of returns, you might be getting a lot of products that are failing, so you might be ranked 7th or 8th for product quality, but you might be ranked first for customer service. So you can have lots of different rankings when it comes to gap analysis, okay? There's lots of different current states. Some things you might already be good at, you want to maintain. Other things you might not be doing very well at that you want to improve. Okay, so gap analysis isn't just saying here is one way to represent us. It's about saying here are different ways, and here are things we're already good at, we want to maintain. Here are things we're perhaps not so good at, and we want to improve. So the second step then is to identify where you want to be with your firm. So we want you to identify what's called the desired state or the future target, or even what's called a stretch goal. How are you going to stretch your business? How are you going to stretch your thinking so that you can achieve above and beyond what you currently are? So what things you need to think about? Well, firstly, what we just did in step one, what are you currently doing, or how are you currently doing your business process, your business amplification in its current state? Where do you want to be within what's a reasonable time frame? Okay, it's about how can you get to your goal in a realistic time frame. So for example, if your business is not making any profit currently, you're just you're making revenue but you're not managing to turn over any profit just yet. Well, for you to then say in 5 years time we want to be making £10 million in profit, probably isn't reasonable, okay? So create a reasonable target. Last thing you want to do is create a target that you can't achieve, and then it just makes people feel more demotivated. Create realistic targets that you can work towards, realistic targets that people can be motivated, people can feel ambitious, people can feel like they can make a difference towards. If you're doing a gap analysis, you need to know the context of your strategic plan. You need to know what it is you're looking to achieve and why those targets are relevant. These targets should be usually between 3 to 5 years out so that you can achieve it by the end of year 5 or the end of year 6 or the end of year 7, okay? So usually looking at setting up targets which can be used at Horizon 2, targets that can be used in the shorter term future. It's about writing them down and then going back to them, okay? So you write down your targets, you've got them there, they're visible for everyone to see so that everyone knows what they're working towards. And then you can go back and revisit them. You can see how well you've performed or not performed, as the case may be. Step 3 is about then identifying the gaps in your business. You know where your business is, you know where you want it to be. Now it's time to what's called bridge that gap, okay? So when doing that, you need to be able to identify those gaps. You need to ensure that your goals and current state exist in the same time period. So going back to our example, say your future goal of 10% growth is 3 years out. You need to then extrapolate your current state for the next 3 years to see the appropriate gap. What does that mean? So you want to achieve 10% growth in 3 years. Well, okay, in order to get there in 3 years' time, what do you need to do next year? What do you need to do in year 2? It's about breaking it down so that you've got steps, you've got chronological order to how you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. Next, we then need to work out, well, why is there a gap? Okay, so we know the current state, we know the future state, we've identified the gap. Now it's about saying, well, why is that gap there? Why is it we're not good at doing this? Why is it that we need to improve on this? So what questions do you need to ask? Well, usually you want to be asking the 5 why questions. For example, why are our clients so difficult to work with? That might be a reasonable question. Why do our clients awkward, or why do our clients not really want to work with us? So it might be because they want something bespoke, okay? So then you would ask yourself, okay, why do they want bespoke work? So the answer might be because they're dealing with different problems that our firm imagined. So the question then is, well, why didn't our company or our firm imagine those problems? The answer to that might be because we started out in one part of the legal sector and most of our clients are in a different sector now. So the question then is, why haven't we developed a service to match the needs of that sector? Answer to that might be because our team is not thinking about new service offerings. Then the question then becomes, well, why are we not thinking about it? And the answer to that might be because we're too busy doing X, Y, or Z. So this is just a pretend conversation, but the idea is you keep asking why. So we started off with asking why are our clients so difficult to work with, and we ended up thinking about why our business isn't thinking about new services. So what you think is the problem might not always be the actual problem. It might actually be the outcome of another different problem. So the problem here is all about how the business isn't understanding and need to evolve their services. And as a result of that perspective, somewhere along the lines, clients have got sick of them or clients don't like working with them. So why are clients difficult to work with was the outcome. But by asking the why questions, you manage to understand why clients felt that way. So what do you need to be able to do? Well, it's all about devising strategies to close that gap. It's about looking at how do you improve on the information that you've uncovered? How do you consider the cost of implementing each solution? How do you identify end dates that you aim to have those gaps resolved in? What are the goals you need to be able to set? What are the milestones you need to track in order to get to those goals? Be careful about trying to close too many gaps at once. Again, taking a scattergun approach and trying to take on too much usually results in failure. It usually results in you actually suffering rather than achieving what you want to achieve. So make sure you're not taking on too much. Finally, if your gaps are unrelated, you might end up putting too much stress on your business and in fact find gaps that are not being attended to properly. So again, try to identify gaps that are similar and can be addressed together rather than trying to address completely different gaps, okay? What are different types of gaps you want to consider? Well, the skills gap. And a skills gap is quite a big one. And this is basically what's called the variance between the skills of a workforce and the skill that's required by the business. I'll give you an example. Say there's a manufacturing company, everything is done by hand. People produce things by hand. Things are transferred using trolleys. People pull the trolleys, push the trolleys. So it's all labor intensive. Okay, it's all done through manual labor. Now let's imagine the company invests in robots. Robots are doing the assembling. Robots are transferring the goods through a production line. There's no need for manual labor, but there is a need for people that are technical so that they can program the robots. They can deal with any IT problems that might arise if the robots stop working. So need people that are mechanical. Now the problem there is the company might not have very many skilled people that are good at mechanics or good at robotics. So what do? So that's an example of what's called a skills gap. Okay, you don't have the skills to be able to cope. So what do you do? Well, to identify those skills, you would use a tool that's used to determine the training and/or hiring requirements of the business. To identify what do we need to bring in, what resources do we require to develop. You can bring in what's called primary tools, such as questionnaires, performance assessments, group discussions, interviews. These are all good things to bring in. But the whole idea is you're looking to identify how you can improve the desired skills levels in line with the business's goals, in line with the business's long-term plan. It's about aligning your primary solutions that identify employee training requirements and establish how those needs can be met. Again, not all employees can be trained. For example, you might have someone that's close to retirement. He or she doesn't know a lot about robotics or isn't very IT savvy. Then the likelihood of them being able to learn new things about computers and robots and then have a chance to build up knowledge and experience when they're so close to retirement age is next to impossible. Okay, so chances are people like that may be let go, they might be made redundant, they might be found other jobs. So how do you perform a skills gap analysis? Well, there's two ways in which you can do that. Number one is at an individual level. Usually line managers are best positioned to identify individual gaps because these are the skills required for a particular job compared to the existing skill level of an employee. And as I said, in a large corporation or a large organization, it's difficult for you to assess each individual yourself. So you leave that job to the line managers, you leave that job to people, supervisors, the ones that are responsible for that individual employee. Alternatively, you can maybe look at a team. You can assess whether employees within that team have the skills to deliver a particular project, or if you need to bring in externals, you need to bring in consultants, you need to bring in outsourcers to do the job. Step two, you need to identify what skills are required. So how do you do that? Well, you look at, well, what skills does the business value? What skills does the business need to succeed? Which of those skills do employees require today to do their job? And which skills do employees require to do their jobs in the future? So it's about looking at where you're at today, where you will be at the future, and again, identifying what skills are required to get you there. Then you need to measure the current skills. So it's about saying, how do you understand how good your employees are at something? Just because the job doesn't involve using a computer doesn't mean they might not be tech savvy. Maybe someone's doing a degree in robotics at university, but in the job, it's all about manual labor. They don't get a chance to showcase that. So what do? You do stuff like assessments and surveys. You might interview your employees. You might do performance review feedbacks. You might do skill analysis software. So the software nowadays that allows people to have the skills tested. So again, these are some of the things that can be used to test the skills of your employees. Step 4 is then to take action. You can do that through two different ways. You might find that, okay, maybe your employees aren't actually all that bad. Maybe the skills are halfway there, they're 50% there. What can you do to build that skill, get it better? So that's training. So you want to train employees to fill those roles. You want to train them to close the gap between the current skills and the desired skills. Alternatively, you might decide, okay, it's not going to be worth our time to train everyone. We'll be better off just hiring a new team, hiring a new group of employees who can deliver that job. Okay. Outsourcing, so we talked about this slightly already, but outsourcing is a strategic decision that allows a company to sometimes decrease its costs It allows them to increase efficiency and allows them to engage a third party to perform the tasks. But this is quite a prominently used technique, particularly again in customer service or in organizations where there is what's called low value add activity. So for example, a lot of banks 10, 15 years ago outsourced their customer service to places like India, places like Indonesia, even where work is cheap. You know, labor, the living wage or the minimum wage is very, very low. People speak English. They're fairly competent at using technology. So a lot of these organizations try to take advantage of that by moving their operations or moving their customer service or moving particular parts of their business process to those countries. The process of outsourcing functions is also called contracting out. So you might hear outsourcing, you might hear contracting out. These are all similar terms. And these processes can involve what's called engaging third-party providers or simply hiring temporary or independent contractors. So it's about bringing in the resource, but not directly by employing them yourself, but using what's called an outsourcer or using a contractor to fulfill that job for you. The types of work that tends to be outsourced is stuff like content writing. So if you've got a website or a blog, you're a big corporation, you don't have time to write this up yourself. You might outsource it so someone writes it for you. Customer support or customer service, again, tends to be outsourced. Marketing can sometimes be outsourced. Human resources, accounting, tax compliance, finance, training, you might get someone external to do your training. Again, these are all things that can be outsourced and used from elsewhere, okay? So though you don't have to necessarily have the skills in your organization, you can get the information from elsewhere. These are some examples of outsourcing in action. So for example, business A is growing and needs more office space. However, the business is in an expensive location and there's no room to expand. So your business is growing. However, say for example, you are based in New York, you're based in London, you're based in Hong Kong, and it's very expensive to rent office space. Well, what you can do is you can outsource some of the work so that it reduces the need for additional space. So the low value add stuff, the stuff that can be done by people externally or people outside of your business that doesn't allow secrets to be shared, well, you just outsource it so that other people do it for you, whilst you can focus on the value add activity. Similarly, say for example, there's a business B, they're looking to expand their service provision. However, the business is constrained by maybe the limited number of fee earners. How can it expand? Well, it might need to look to reduce the delivery of existing services. It can do that by outsourcing some of the admin work so that the labor constraints on its organization are lowered, okay? So you might not have as many workers as are required to deliver the product or service. Maybe you want to outsource some of your work so that you're not necessarily employing people, but you're getting the job done. Business C is facing increased labor costs. So in turn, the margin on service delivery is falling. There's too much cost on bringing resources in. The business can perhaps outsource part of its processes. So for example, call handling and early customer service or marketing, that can all be outsourced to a company that can do it at a cheaper rate, saving the business money and allowing it to focus its resources on value add activity. What about the advantages of outsourcing? Well, it can reduce labor costs and overheads. So you don't have to have an office. You don't have to manually employ people. You're not responsible for paying their wage or their pensions or their benefits. You know, it's all contracted out. A contractor deals with all of that. You don't have to worry about it. It allows you to focus on what's called your core competence. Your business can focus on the things it does well. You don't have to worry about the little things, the admin stuff that isn't important to your business. It allows you to improve your competitive advantage by outsourcing time-consuming processes as well to third parties. It frees up your internal resources to allow them to be used for other purposes. So your people, your workers can be used to focus specifically on what you're looking to achieve. It reduces the risk by sharing with external parties. So what does that mean? It means, well, if things go wrong, it's not just your business affected, others are affected too, so you're sharing the risk. And finally, it improves the flexibility and efficiency of your business operations. Again, because you're able to focus on your core competencies, you are able to perhaps be more efficient, perhaps be more effective in your use of time and money. What about disadvantages? Well, potentially you could lose some sensitive data. You don't know how that data is going to be handled. What if it gets manhandled or mishandled? Then what happens? You could potentially lose management control, which is an ability to control activities that are outsourced. So again, when something is outsourced, you lose managerial control over it. Yes, you might set KPIs or key performance indicators to monitor performance, but you don't have any say over how it's managed. You don't have any control over making sure that that performance is done properly or appropriately. The outsourcing company may impose unexpected costs. So that outsourcing company might not be able to do the service. They might discover that they need more money to deliver it. They might have additional costs in your business, such as perhaps their service is very poor, that has a brand reputation issue. Customers stop buying from you, you start losing sales. So again, these are unexpected costs, or these are additional costs that perhaps have now started impacting your business that you didn't anticipate. Finally, lack of quality control. So again, the third parties that you use, they're predominantly driven by making a profit. Okay, they also want to make money. So they might not have as big a impetus on making sure that services are delivered with quality. Their focus will likely just be on trying to make money from you. And that's really it, ladies and gentlemen. Outsourcing is the final tool for Horizon 3 that I wanted to share with you. So since we started, we looked at Horizons 1, 2, and 3. We looked at why it's important to consider different timeframes and what different timeframes mean for the success of an organization. We looked at the tools and frameworks that are important. And today we concluded by looking at what can a business do, what are strategies that business might want to employ in order to build a better future for itself. And that's the end of your strategic management lecture series, okay? What I want you to now do is start thinking about your assessment and start thinking about how you can use some of the material that we've covered over the last 3 sessions to build a profile for your chosen company. I want you to analyze using the framework that you've chosen, identify some of the benefits and advantages of using that framework, identify how an organization might implement those strategies and what the benefits are of implementing those strategies. And if you can do all of that, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to score a high mark with your assessment. Okay. Any questions on any of what we've covered either today or over the last couple of weeks? No? No questions?
Yeah, no question.
Perfect. Ideal. Thanks, Aaron. Anyone else?
Hi. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, no question. But I want to find out where we can get all the materials for the 3 sessions.
Yep. So again, if you contact your advisor at LSBR, they'll be able to tell you where to get access to these materials. So after each lecture, I have to send these to Abhishek, and Abhishek is then, as far as I'm aware, uploading these to the portal. So if you contact your student advisor, they'll be able to advise where you can access these resources.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions from anyone?
Professor, could I have Abhishek's email so I can contact her?
Yep, so Abhishek is a guy, so it's a him, but I'll post his email address here.
Okay, so just let me write it down.
No worries. There you go. So I've shared it with you in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Fantastic.
Okay. A minute. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, listen, if there's no any further questions, I will end today's session here. Best of luck in the assessment.
Can you please show the email address? I'm sorry.
It's in the chat. So if you click the chat function, you'll be able to see the email address. Okay. Perfect. Okay, well, as I said, if there's no any further questions, best of luck with your assessment. And hopefully, if those of you are looking to attend business environment, I will see you all tomorrow afternoon. Okay? Thank you now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.